Lindsay Davis and David Muir wrapping this presidential debate between former President Donald Trump and Vice President of the United States, Kamala Harris. You could not have two more different candidates with two more different approaches to the task at hand here. I had a television executive once tell me that everything you need to know about a live event on television, you can tell with the sound off. And if you had the sound off for this debate, which I'm sure nobody did, what you would have seen was Trump looking physically hunched, angry, squinting. I never saw the whites of his eyes the entire debate, shouting, constantly interrupting himself, not just going down tangents, but being unable to finish a thought, seeming very frustrated, very angry, very negative, and very tired. In contrast, Kamala Harris appeared to be sort of light on her feet, quite puzzled by him. The two-shot of him squinting and hunching and seeming to be having physical trouble squeezing the words out, certainly squeezing the sentences out, while she just looked at him absolutely puzzled by where it was he was going. I think that visual may be as much of a takeaway as anything that was said. That said, boy, what was said? Trump repeatedly coming back to the same lines over and over again about world crime rates being low, and that being the explanation for America having high crime rates. He said strange things like all Democrats wanted Roe versus Wade overturned. He said that it is legal to kill children in the United States. He insisted that he saw something on television about eating dogs. That was one of the weirdest moments of the debate, saying he saw it on television, so therefore he knows it's true, and so therefore what the police said about it can't be true. Kamala Harris kept going back to her plan, her campaign, but also kept going directly at him. She told him that military leaders who have worked with him have told her that Donald Trump is a disgrace. As she said to him, that you are a disgrace. She described him as confused and unable to understand that he lost the election. She said he was fired by 81 million people, and he's having a very difficult time processing that. She said he was handed $400 million on a silver platter and then filed bankruptcy 6 times. She said people leave his rallies early due to exhaustion and boredom. In talking about the Russia-Ukraine war, she said Putin would be sitting in Kyiv, if you were president, with his eyes on the rest of Europe, starting with Poland. And why don't you tell the 800,000 Polish Americans right here in Pennsylvania how quickly you would give up for the sake of favor and what you think is a friendship with what is known to be a dictator who would eat you for lunch? I've never seen a starker contrast in presentation from two candidates in any debate, in any type of contest, in any political race.
I think that's because there hasn't been one. Now, I think that we all know that maximum humility is required of us, particularly in the next 57 days. We do not know the outcome of the election. Yeah. But if these matter at all in the outcomes of said elections, it should be over. Because she didn't just prevail in every exchange. She prevailed at the humaning. Questions that were deeply personal, she turned into questions not about herself, not about her campaign, not about the Democratic Party, not even about Donald Trump, but about the country. The whole beginning was, I don't know if he noticed, his synapses did not seem to be firing, but she got out her entire economic agenda, the thing that Chris Christie suggested she do, use this as an opportunity to say what
in the first 2 minutes.
She did it in about the first 8 minutes. Yeah. It was all out there. You know, to the degree that Trump has support because his supporters are scared or nostalgic about an America that's slipping away. I suppose that was somewhere in there. You know, for what it's worth, the Drudge Report has him, a picture of him with the cat saying it's over. I mean, and to the degree that it's our job to cover what the campaigns do and the political apparatus, the Trump campaign is going to plans B, C, and D, and they have them. You know, they're dark and they're dirty and they're heinous.
What do you mean?
You know, they're going to the types of things that Trump tweeted about, the threats, the retribution, the placement of allies on election boards, as they've done in the state of Georgia. Because this did not win Trump any new voters.
Lawrence?
You know, we are now seeing maybe the second presidential debate in history where Poland might be the deciding issue. that point you isolated, 800,000 Polish people in the state of Pennsylvania. Kamala Harris reached out directly to those voters. If she got 10,000 of them to focus on the threat to Poland that Vladimir Putin represents, she may have won the presidential election in that particular response. Let's start at the beginning. When they entered, I was wondering what was going to happen. Would there be a handshake?
Yeah.
We're going to see that video more than once. It's Donald Trump running away from her. It's Donald Trump trying to turn away as the adult in the room approaches and crosses to do what every presidential candidate before her has done in that situation, which is to extend her hand to the other candidate. And Donald Trump runs away from it until he can't. She literally has to corner him to shake his hand, and she does it. Two things I would point out quickly about it. You heard the person who was president of the United States on January 6th say to the American people, I wasn't responsible for security. President of the United States, commander-in-chief is what this job is about, and he's saying when they're attacking the Capitol and I'm doing nothing for 2 hours and more than 2 hours, I wasn't responsible for security. Another thing you isolated where he said that Democrats and everyone wanted Roe versus Wade overturned. Here's the problem with that lie. That's his worst lie of the night, because he was lying to the voters about the voters. Yeah. He was lying about you, and you know it. More than 60% of the country is sitting there saying, he's lying about me. I'm a Republican, and I didn't want Roe overturned. I'm a Democrat. I'm an independent. I didn't want Roe overturned. He actually lied directly to the voters about the voters.
Joy?
I think the moment that the debate went completely sideways for Donald Trump was the moment when Vice President Harris was very smart about saying, she said, I'm the only person. This was an answer about immigration. David Muir asked about illegal border crossings. We knew that question was coming, that they were going to talk about that, talking about it reaching a record high, numbers have dropped, blah, blah, blah. She says, I'm the only person on this stage who's prosecuted transnational gangs, trafficking drugs and human beings. She talks about that bill that was on the table that Donald Trump called Republicans and said, don't vote for because he wanted the issue, but he didn't want to solve the problem. He just wanted the issue for the election. And then she did what I think is the smartest thing of the night. And it is the thing that we got from Hillary Clinton that she was being advised to do. Get him with the one thing that will completely destabilize him for the rest of the debate. And it did. And you named it before. It's when he said, essentially, she said that we need a leader who focuses on solutions. He's going to talk about immigration when it's not even the subject, because he kept going back to the millions of people and they're all criminals. And he kept doing it. And she called him on it. And she said, note that he's going to talk about immigration when it's not the question. And I invite you to attend one of his rallies where he talks about Hannibal Lecter. And I want you to know that people at these rallies start leaving early. What you won't hear him talk about is you. That ended Donald Trump's, the cheese being firmly affixed to the cracker.
Yeah.
He literally, after that, could not stop interrupting. He could not stop going back. He could not stop going right back to his special place where he went on about immigration. He argued. He then turned around and interrupted and tried to keep arguing about crowd size. He tried to say we're going to World War III. He said millions of towns, Aurora, Springfield. He said that multiple times. They're eating dogs and cats. It was after that he went into the dogs and cats. David Muir breaks in and says, no, sir. There is no credible reporting about that. He kept rambling. I think what Vice President Harris managed to do was every single thing that the campaign beforehand said they wanted her to do. She got her policy points out. After this debate, what people will think about when they think about Vice President Harris is $25,000 for building a first home, $50,000 for a new business. They will think about the $6,000 tax credit because she kept saying it.
Yeah.
And what he kept saying was rambling, bizarre nonsense that made him look old. It made him look unstable. It made him look not just unpresidential, but the look that was on Vice President Harris's face. I kept screenshotting her face. The look said pity. Yeah. She looked like she pitied him. And she kept looking at him like, are you okay? Yeah. And she finally said, I think you're having a hard time connecting with reality. Donald Trump got destroyed in this debate because he can't control his mind. And you don't want a president of the United States that is not in full control of his mind.
It was by far the best debate performance against Donald Trump ever by anyone, I think.
Look, you know,
including
quick parentheses, it may very well be the best televised debate performance ever.
Yeah,
I cannot think of a better one.
I thought it was exceptional. I thought it's the best anyone's ever done against him. Both Republicans in Republican primaries and those big group brawls and one-on-one, even though I think both Biden and Hillary had acquitted themselves well against him. The thing that she did, and it almost became like comical at a certain point, was she's doing two things every time. What do I want to communicate? Because we're talking about how do you negotiate this, right? How much him, how much you? What do I want to communicate about what I'm doing? And then, in the midst of that, just this little lure for the fish, and it could be John McCain. You know, if you bring up John McCain, he's going to litigate John McCain.
Yes.
It could be very fine people at Charlottesville. You know, if you bring up very fine people, he's going to swim upstream to go talk about very fine people. It could be suckers and losers. He's going to go talk about suckers and losers. Every single time she would communicate, and then she would leave dangling this bait, and he would swim up to the bait. And the bait was always a thing that Donald Trump is obsessed with about himself.
Yes.
A grievance, a thing in the past, the well-worn things that we've heard him go on and on about. Nancy Pelosi was the reason that January 6th got attacked, yada, yada. And every one of them just served to reaffirm the fact that the guy is old, out of it, and obsessed with his old grievances. And I will just say as a final point, to your point on humility, I have no idea. Like, you could come out of this and the polling's going to be exactly the same.
Yeah.
Or you could tell me that some group of swing voters are like, I don't know. I don't have the mind of a swing voter, obviously. I don't know. I don't know. I'm humble on that.
Yeah.
What I saw was someone totally outmatched in every single way.
Can I just add, though?
No, you go.
I think that we have all been tough and critical of the press. ABC did a very fine job.
Yes,
they did
excellent.
reporting on the eating of pets,
Which is important. Like, you got to say it.
I mean, and I think sometimes people are reluctant to put themselves in a story. David Muir didn't hesitate to say, I went back and watched the tape. You didn't sound sarcastic to me when you said I lost by a whisker. Kyle Myers got Trump on three sides of whether or not he won in 2020. He said I won, and then he said, I said sarcastically that I lost by a whisker, and then David Muir ended it by saying, no, that wasn't sarcastic. So what the American people heard was Trump on three sides of the outcome of 2020. And David Muir and Lindsey Davis played an important role in that.
They were excellent. I think kudos to them because they did just enough fact checking not to be to be a part of the debate, but to make sure that, really egregious lies were shut down. The one thing I would add is theatrically, what Vice President Harris did that I thought was very smart was that when she was saying something about Donald Trump, particularly when she was talking about the way foreign governments that she has interacted with think about him, she looked at him.
Yes.
And he would not look at her.
He would not.
He would not look at
time.
her. He stayed and he glowered into the camera. And that two-shot, I think, puts her at a stature so far above him. He looked weak and he looked afraid because he wouldn't look her in the eye. And she said, you are a disgrace. And I'm not saying I'm saying you're a disgrace. I'm saying that the people that I speak with that are heads of
military leaders who have worked with you, tell me that you are a disgrace. And in order to say you, she has to turn to him and he can't bear it.
He can't bear it. And then he, in his own defense, he goes to Viktor Orban. And you could almost hear the entire audience laughing because you're like, you've got to be kidding. That's your defense, Viktor Orban. And his other good one was when he tried to explain how it was his idea to get out of Afghanistan, but it was a terrible idea. He says, well, he names like a random name of an Arabic name and says, well, that guy loves me. Yeah. Like he didn't have anyone that he could point to that was like a character witness.
He also invented a head of the Taliban named Abdul. Which is not the name of the head of the Taliban, just to be clear. He just randomly named him. Just one more thing, and then I know we have colleagues, whatever, but just on the abortion answer, which was to me was like the worst moment in the first debate because Joe Biden got asked an abortion question and he just did not deliver the answer that, is right there. She destroyed him on the abortion answer. She talked about why we're here. She talked about the consequences in the real world of women bleeding out in a parking lot waiting to get care because they have a miscarriage that they cannot be treated, and 12-year-old survivors of incest. She completely destroyed him on it. She sort of gave him no territory to like wiggle away from it. And also, he refused to say he would veto a national ban.
Yes, and
which he could. And J.D. Vance said he could. He could have, and he didn't.
It's now 11 o'clock on the East Coast. You are watching our coverage of the second presidential debate, the first debate between Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump, which concluded just a few minutes ago in Philadelphia. I mean, Chris, to your point about news being made here, Trump refused to say that he would veto a national abortion ban. Trump also repeatedly refused to say that he thinks or thinks that it would be good or wants for Ukraine to win the war against Russia.
Yeah,
given half a dozen opportunities.
Yes, he would not say it. And then he talks about how he's very concerned about the number of troops that Russia has lost after they invaded another sovereign country. I mean, it was stunning. Joy, to your point about the way that Kamala Harris turned it to him directly, I just want to read that part from the transcript. Kamala Harris says to the camera, Donald Trump was fired by 81 million people. So let's be clear about that. And clearly, he's having a very difficult time processing that. But we cannot afford to have a president of the United States who attempts, as he did in the past, to upend the will of the voters in a free and fair election. And I'm going to tell you that I have traveled the world as vice president. World leaders are laughing at Donald Trump. I mean, he cannot bear the idea of somebody laughing at him. World leaders are laughing at Donald Trump. I have talked with military leaders, some of whom work, and then she turns, with you. And they say, you're a disgrace. And when you then talk in this way in a presidential debate over and over again about court cases you've lost because you did, in fact, lose that election, it leads one to believe that perhaps we do not have in the candidate to my right the temperament or the ability to not be confused about that fact. And that's deeply troubling. And the American people deserve better. That is playing those two tracks that you're talking about, Chris. The camera talking to people at home and talking to her opponent in ways that deeply, deeply rattled him. And she's able to do it in the same answer.